Isn't that crazy? It's almost ironic. I was arresting people for addictions, heroin addiction, maybe repeated DUIs, whatnot. And I was never the type of person to have a judgment. I wasn't judgmental of them, but I was kind of like, oh, this guy's going to blow really high because he's an alcoholic. And then, hey, everybody come look what he's going to blow on the machine. It's going to be really high. And now looking back, I'm like, holy cow, I'm just like they were. Like, there's no difference between us, right?
Welcome to another episode of Entrepreneurs in Recovery. I'm really excited that you are here. How are you doing? Welcome. So I wanted just to talk about first the cosmic humor of life. And today's episode is that. And you're going to hear more about it. I don't want to spoil every surprise, but my guest today, Jeff Fields, is someone who has been in law enforcement for over 22 years. He's now on a purpose mission to help people to get help, ask for help if they're in law enforcement for their struggles with addiction or mental health. And he's on a mission. He's an author. He's a speaker. But we just have a really, what I feel is a grounded conversation into law enforcement, into many other topics that I hope become regular discussions and start to destigmatize these myths and start to humanize and bring a lot of compassion into the side of law enforcement. Because we hear a lot about the sides of criminality and punishing people for their pain. But what if you are the police officer, the postal inspector, the detective? What are you going through? Where are the places you can ask for help? So we talk about a lot of the gaps, and it's just a fascinating conversation. And I really hope you enjoy it. And also, I forgot to do this in the last few episodes. Go ahead and like and subscribe to the show if you would, and more people will be able to find the episode. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify. I really appreciate each and every one of you. And really just enjoy your day today. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Jesse.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And before we get started, I always like to introduce or tell people how we got introduced. And we got introduced through a mutual friend, Matt Drinkham, and he runs the Eternal Optimist podcast. Incredible guy, just a guy you want to know, master connector. And so he introduced us, and anyone Matt introduces to me, I'm always going to take the call. And so we met. I looked up your story, your book, all the work you're doing. And I was like, wow, this is going to be a really fun discussion, because we have yet to, on the show, have someone who has such an extensive law enforcement background and a topic that you're, I would say, an expert in, talking about the experiences in law enforcement and the experiences of trauma and probably the silent epidemic that's happening, inside of law enforcement. And then also your journey of sobriety and addiction. So it's a really good fit. And, just getting to know you and getting to know you more here on this show, I'm looking forward to it. So thanks for being on.
Absolutely.
And yeah. So let's dive in. Let's let the listeners know a little bit about why you chose law enforcement, maybe some of your backstory, and then how that sort of led into the work you're doing today.
Yeah. Well, I was raised in a law enforcement family. So my dad was law enforcement. I had cousins, law enforcement. I honestly didn't have any plans on going into law enforcement until school got hard, right? And so I was kind of went in that direction. It's part of my story too. It's kind of the, hey, I want to please my family by doing what I feel like they want me to do. And so, I started my career back in 2001, right when 9/11 happened. As a matter of fact, I was in the academy when the second plane hit. I remember watching it vividly on TV. And I was in local law enforcement starting out. That was the academy. I did about 10 years in local law enforcement. I'm from the Southwest. I'm from New Mexico. So I bounced around between New Mexico and Arizona in my law enforcement career until finally, around 2010, I got into my federal career in law enforcement with Homeland Security, and met my wife there, and we ended up moving across the country to the East Coast. Did about 10 years with Homeland Security before I finished my career with 3 years. There's an agency called the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and finished out there. But in a nutshell, that was my career. But it's what happened in my career that's more interesting, right? Because like law enforcement's cool, got to do a whole bunch of great stuff. But what happened within my career, especially with my addiction, I'm sure we'll talk about it. But it was my career that really motivated my addiction. So I mean, it was the perfect storm, as I like to say, for it. And then I would later learn with my current mission now in recovery is it's an epidemic. Addiction, law enforcement, mental health all seem to kind of coincide with each other, and it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. And in my current mission, I'm trying to reach others who may be in the same position I was in, and try to walk with them, or at least give a glimmer of hope of it gets better. And I started that all off by writing a book, and it's kind of my story, and talking a very humility based book. And that has kind of just propelled me into this space where I'm talking to you now, and I'm able to try to share my story and hopefully give some people some insight, right? Some suggestions on where we go from here.
Yeah, thanks for that opening. And I have a lot of questions, and I'm going to start with this one, though, which is not a question, but your path took you on to become a U.S. Postal Inspector. Well, you don't know this about me, but when I was 22 years old, I was arrested in a federal case because I ordered prescription opioids through the mail, and I was arrested by U.S. Postal inspectors. I won't mention their names because I became really good friends with them, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And yeah, so small world, the full circle of this
Wow.
moment to have
Wow.
a former postal. So thank you for coming on the show. I heard this in the podcast. I heard you on, and I was like, oh my God, this guy because I was arrested in 2005. So, this is just like full circle moment to have you on. And obviously my life, this is almost 20 years later, but it is a full circle moment to also have someone
It's
on who's a
crazy.
former U.S. Postal Inspector that I
Which a
was.
lot of people don't have interactions with it. It's an old agency. It's the oldest federal agency around. And it's funny to run into people that still have interactions with them, right? That's crazy. It's a full loop for me as well, right?
Yeah, it's just wild. I had to say that because I remember the agent's name and I remember him very well. And he was, the bottom line is he was actually a good guy. He was just doing his job. And,
Mm-hmm.
and, I'm, yeah, just, I don't know. So I had to mention that. And with that said, you said a few things that sparked my interest. And one of the things you talked about was the epidemic. So let's talk about like this hidden epidemic in law enforcement that is not really talked about because you said it coincides addiction. This is
Mm-hmm.
so interesting that you said this. Addiction coincides with
Mm-hmm.
law enforcement. So that's so interesting to me because you think about the war on drugs and you think about the people being incarcerated and the compassion that we really in 2025 I would hope we would have for people being locked up for drugs, but let's be honest, it's not there most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so interesting to think that the people that are locking people up are also
Mm-hmm.
people who are traumatized, people who have drug issues. So Can we just talk about that a little bit and your experiences with that?
Yeah, I mean, and isn't that crazy? It's almost ironic. Um, and I talk about this in my book comparatively, how I was arresting people for addictions, heroin addiction, maybe repeated DUIs, whatnot. And I was never the type of person to have a judgment. I wasn't judgmental of them, but I was kind of like, oh, this guy's going to blow really high because he's an alcoholic. And then, hey, everybody come look what he's going to blow on the machine. It's going to be really high. And now looking back, I'm like, holy cow, I'm just like they were. Like there's no difference between us, right? Um, Addiction wise, or in our faults or in our points. And so it was kind of a aha moment for me where, why isn't this talked about more in law enforcement? Because I know there's other people that are struggling. And I mean, yeah, it's a tough job, and you um, encounter a lot of things that create trauma in your life. And I have a theory, and I have other people that agree with me, so I'm not out of line here. But I mean, I think a lot of people who go into a first responder role have some sort of trauma on board already, right? Whether it be childhood trauma or something that happened previous to them getting in their career. And like for me, having, previous childhood trauma coming on, I wanted to be a helper. I wanted to fix the problems that I couldn't fix, that of myself. But I didn't go in thinking like, I have this trauma, I got to do my job. And no, that percolated later. But when you go into a career and you already have that onboard trauma, you start piling on the career trauma. And then that's where you see a lot of guys get burnout. It's there's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of infidelity, there's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of breaking the law. But it's just not talked about, right? Because you're supposed to be um, a better example. You're held to a different standard. And I think throughout my career, I indulged in a lot of these things thinking that it was normal because it was a culture and I wanted to be accepted, or there was just nothing else to do. Well, the people that you party with aren't going to look after you when it starts getting bad for you, right? They're just going to go their own way. And so when it started getting really bad for me, I was left on my own, right? Indulging by myself. But I had nobody to talk to because my friends wouldn't understand, my coworkers wouldn't understand. And at the time I was federal, so I had a top secret clearance, right? If I talk about this, I'm going to lose my clearance, I'm going to lose my job. So I was pigeonholed. I'm like, well, what do I do? Well, I continue to drink, but I'll hide it. And I think a lot of guys, so many guys do that. Because if you go in and talk to your supervisor or, a department counselor or whoever and say, hey, I have this problem. I'm suicidal, or I'm drinking too much, or having these intrusive thoughts. They're going to take your gun away. They're going to put you on some kind of leave. And then you feel like, well, that was disciplined. I was disciplined for sharing something that I need help with. So a lot of guys avoid doing it. And that's where the epidemic comes, right? So there's just so many, I think, they're in that weird gray area of not being able to find some type of help, that all they do is just push it down and go further down their own holes, of a mess. And so in my current role right now, in my mission, trying to reach out to other men and women who may be struggling, um, there's a consensus of what I just said, right? It is exactly like that. There is more awareness today. There absolutely is. I'm learning about all of these things where departments have counseling, or there's these different nonprofits that are helping out first responders. So it's becoming more prevalent. But the fact that I didn't know about it says that there's a problem. I didn't know about it until I searched for it. So that's where we live right now. It's just trying to, people in the military, it's very known with PTSD stuff and trauma. There's so many places for them to get help. At least it's advertised that way. But you don't see advertisements for law enforcement or first responders. And so that's where I would like to try to promote, hey, at the very least, look at Jeff Fields. I can be somebody you can talk to. You're not alone. You're not unique. Everybody's not everybody, but everybody's having the same issues that you may be going through. You're not alone.
Mm. Yeah, this is such an important topic. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding with what's happening with people being incarcerated for their pain,
Mm-hmm.
and just like law enforcement, they're in a lot of pain. They've had painful, maybe childhoods or painful experiences, PTSD during their law enforcement tenures. And I think on the flip side, you have people who look at cops and they're like, oh, cops are pieces of crap and all
Mm-hmm.
these things. It's like, if we could just all kind of see from a wider lens that there's so much pain, there's so much happening in someone's life, whether they're in law enforcement or not. And to think that there's stigma on both sides, there's the
Mm-hmm.
stigma for the criminal who gets arrested for possession of drugs that were using it clearly to numb their pain. And of course, there's so many arguments. Well, that person was dealing fentanyl, and then there's all these semantics of it. But let's just be real. A lot of it is just the pain of living in this Western society of whether it's unhealthy foods or really programmed education where we're not expressing our creative
Mm-hmm.
abilities. There's so many things that start right from the root, right from the beginning. And discussions like this, I think, are so important because it normalizes you as a former law enforcement agent, taking on multiple roles and seeing it from my lens, which is my life was abruptly interrupted when I was arrested with the federal charges through the post office of all places, which you're familiar with. And I think, these are the discussions that need to get to the top all the way, to I don't care what politician it is. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter to me. I don't care if it's Trump, RFK Jr. It doesn't matter. What matters is the discussions are becoming normalized. And then we're bringing funding into helping the mental health of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for a fact, I went back home recently and I was watching my nephew's high school baseball game. And I was next to a guy who I went to high school with, who I haven't seen since high school. And he was he's a police officer for many, many years. And he said to me, my job has completely changed. I used to arrest criminals. I used to go out and arrest criminals and, do all these things. And now today, I'm literally like a therapist for the people I
Mm-hmm.
arrest. I'm like a mental health counselor helping people who are overdosing on fentanyl and it's like a whole different job. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
especially since COVID. So, and then we had the discussion, which I'd like to bring up with you, is he was telling me about the funding for mental health. And I'm like, well, what is the money that you get for your own mental health to be able to have the compassion for the people you're arresting? And he goes, oh, well, no, we don't get that. But
Mm-hmm.
this year we're getting it. And it was like such a low amount he was getting. I'm like, that's not even enough to hire a therapist. That's not even enough to hire a coach that has this, like hire someone like you. It's like, man, there's such a gap opportunity. So what do you think is the solution? How can we start to bridge the gap between what is happening in law enforcement and getting this message out so there's just more funding? I mean, it comes down to money every time. So I'm curious, how do we actually get the funding so that law enforcement can be educated in addiction? They could be educated in mental health. They could also access services, vacation time, nervous system
Mm-hmm.
reprogramming. Where do you think we are in that
I mean,
discussion?
I think it's an education thing. More people talking about it, right? Even if these programs were readily available, you still have to deal with the culture first in law enforcement because you have a whole bunch of type A personalities who are not willing to, may not be willing to talk to somebody or admit that they have a problem. And so that's kind of where my area is, where I'm trying to break the stigmas. So at least you will have enough humility to seek help. And And I think some states are getting better about it. I mean, there are these peer support programs that a lot of agencies have, where people can talk to people. But alongside with getting the culture changed, you also have to change the fear of repercussion. And that's with management now, like educating management, like, hey, you don't need to put somebody, they call it putting them on the beach, right? Putting time off with pay or without pay. You don't have to put them on the beach because they have this issue, or at least not immediately, right? It needs to be presented in a different way. They already feel like a broken toy, so why are you going to treat them like one? And there's a lot of self discovery and all that too. If I'm coming to my manager and saying, hey, I've got these problems, I cannot identify them and I don't know why. I need a manager to be a little bit more compassionate, or at least show me or guide me in the right direction, and that's can be few and far between. Um, you brought something else up as far as the difference between, like you talk about, like, so you have the two sides. You have people that are getting incarcerated, and then you have law enforcement, and there's another element to all of this as well. I tried really hard in a lot of instances in my career to treat the people that I was dealing with compassion. And it's really hard to um, do that all the time. But granted, I want to be able to show that, hey, in law enforcement, you wear so many hats. And you're right. Your friend is right. You're a therapist, right? You're a medic, or there's all these different hats that you wear. But I think that the culture is changing a little bit with the younger officers, where they treat people as if they're just a stat, right? And I hate to use that term because some people get offended by it, but when it's not that, it's hey, why? I want to ask you why, or how did you get here? And then show that compassion to that individual you may be arresting or that you're dealing with, so at least they know that there is hope. And I like to tell people, especially people who are just really like lost, that hey, you have value. You have value. Somebody values you, and you need to learn to embrace that and use what you have in order to do something great. Whereas instead of saying, hey, you keep dealing dope, you're going to jail. Didn't you learn your lesson last time? And so I think when you change the stigma, or at least that identify, hey, there's no difference between me and you. I was hiding bottles of vodka outside of my house that my neighbor would hide for me. He was my dealer. How is that any different than you going to your dealer for whatever you're trying to score? It's the
Mhm.
same thing. And telling stories like that and trying to educate people that this is happening, I don't know if it's a funding issue or if it's I really don't want to deal with this, because mental health is hard. It really is. I mean, I think because it's hard, people throw other things at trying to fix it, and it's not going to get fixed, right? I mean, it's just throwing people or bodies at the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think about like your story, right? You grew up in a law enforcement family, right? So think about you growing up in a law enforcement family, but think about the other side of this. Think about growing up in a family where your dad is locked up in prison because he was addicted to crack, and
Hmm.
then your mom was out there doing whatever she had to survive to raise three children. And you know what I'm saying? And now your childhood, instead of it being this frame, and I'm not saying your childhood was easy at all. I'm
Hmm.
just saying
Hmm.
the that shaped who you became. Your identity became what you saw your father do. And if you just flip it, a lot of the people that are being arrested, many of them are being arrested because they didn't have a foundation other than it was crisis management from the
Hmm.
very beginning. And so again, we're locking up people for their pain instead of trying to understand like why I got to give shout out to Gabor Mate every time, because like he's don't ask why the addiction, acts why the pain. And
Hmm.
it nails it on the head. And then when you start to do that, you start to realize the people who are sitting or standing or driving, listen to this podcast are numbing out in some way. They're
Hmm.
numbing out with something: food, sugar,
Hmm.
sex, cryptocurrency addiction. That's kind of a new one. All these other ones that I'm like, and so this is the, like you said, compassion. How do we have that self compassion for ourselves, which is where it starts, to then have judges, to then have law enforcement and
Hmm.
different entities that are literally a whole mega system in itself. There's a huge business. It's business, right? When it really comes down to it, and maybe we could talk about this, like arresting someone and charging them is a business too, right? There's fines, there's restitution, and now you have a system where how is it funded? And
Hmm.
so I am also curious about how do you look at like the funding of this system of law enforcement and criminal charges. Part of the system staying alive is if we do cure and heal all these people with addiction, where does law enforcement, prisons, judges, where does their salaries come from besides money that gets printed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think that a lot of the salaries come from the punitive, you know, fees or fines. I mean, a lot of it, it's taxpayer dollars. Um, but I think that the problem is so bad that you have a lot of law enforcement and anybody in the judicial system. They're reactive, right? You're reacting to what's happening instead of being proactive. And being proactive is kind of like what I was saying, talking with the person who's struggling on the street, right? And you're exactly right. You said it. Drinking and addiction and drug addiction is just a symptom of something bigger, right? It's not being able to just really explore why you're wanting to numb out. And a lot of people don't realize that. I think they get stuck on the fact like I have a drinking problem, I can't stop. Well, why? Why do you have a drinking problem? And I had a therapist tell me a long time ago that stuck with me that, don't try to cure your problems until you have a baseline. And that baseline is a little bit of sobriety, because you're not going to think clearly. You're not going to be able to really decipher on what that nagging pain is deep inside of you. And so I think that having that type of education, even with judges, you're right. And I mean, there's a lot of compassionate judges out there, but there's also judges who are sick and tired of seeing the same person over and over again. And I really wish there was a magic pill for everybody to take, and everything would be better. And I would love to see, like, oh, man, law enforcement is just kind of our security. We to make sure that nobody breaks into my house, and we're not worried about any type of drug epidemic or drinking or whatnot. But I mean, it's never going to be that way because we're human, and mental health is such an issue, and it's only getting worse, right? You said it at the beginning. Officers are seeing things now that they never thought they would have to deal with. They're seeing things I never had to deal with. I mean, I could only imagine what a lot of these kids today are going to resort to later because of what the influences are now for them. I have two daughters. My daughter throws a tantrum when you take the internet away from her. That's my fault. But that's an addiction. And then I stress out and I'm like, well, she has an addictive personality like her dad. I'm like, damn it. What is she going to resort to when she can't get that immediate dopamine hit over and over and over again from like YouTube? And so these things keep me up at night, but we're all the same. We're all dealing with the same problem, but all we're doing is talking about it. We're not doing anything about it. Nobody's taking it seriously. And I don't know if I necessarily answered your question as far as like the judicial system.
I went kind of deep on that. I mean, I
Yeah.
kind of, I let my, yeah, if I let myself go too far, it gets too down the rabbit
Yeah.
hole. But yeah.
But no, I get what you're saying. And I don't, I mean, I'm not going to get all political as far as like what I feel like, are we over incarcerating? And I think we are in in a lot of areas. I think there should be more remedial or more health. We shut down what was it? The 80s and 90s. We started shutting down, um, for lack of a better term, mental health asylums and places for people that had these problems. And And then we started just pushing them on the streets, and that's why you have such a homelessness problem now, right? They're not getting the mental health that they need, help that they need. And I think it starts there. And there's so many people a whole lot smarter than me that realize this in government, that there needs to be some kind of place that helps people with their mental health issues. And once you start getting some baseline with these people, helping them with that, crime rates will go down, because nearly everybody that I arrested suffered in one shape or form some mental health issue. But there's just nowhere for them to go, and it's expensive to pay for your own therapist, right? I mean, so I think
Yeah.
that's part of the solution. It's easier said than done.
Yeah, I think when we talked last time, I talked about PARI, which is the Police Assisted
Hmm.
Addiction Recovery Initiative. And I think you said you never heard of it before, which is
Yeah.
so interesting. How long you've been in law enforcement, never even heard of this organization. The reason why I heard of this organization is my friend works for HIDA, the High
Hmm.
Intensity Drug Trafficking Area in New England, and he told me about their organization. And I spoke with someone who's associated with them, and I'm like, I've been in addiction recovery for almost 2 decades, and I've never heard of PARI. And so this is this education piece. And
Hmm.
so, and you can look it up if anyone's listening, Police Assisted Addiction Recovery Initiative. Like, what? How did I just found out about this like a few months ago? I think that's the big thing is there is initiatives happening. We just don't know about them. There is education in books and podcasts that are helpful. We just don't hear about them. So like,
Hmm.
your book is a memoir of your story. And I know one of the things you mentioned about it was it's not about all the war stories and things
Hmm.
about in criminal. It's like your actual, authentic expression of what happened and you trying to figure out in words, this is what happened to me. And I really love that because it takes a lot of courage to write that and and be that vulnerable, put yourself out there. But like how many people have a story that
Hmm.
could write a memoir like that are in law enforcement? And that's my mission really is when I look at my life, I'm no one special. Are you kidding me? I don't even know, like, the fact that I'm behind this microphone talking to you in many ways is it's really mind-blowing because my life blew up with drug addiction when it crossed the line and I got arrested, and that started my recovery journey of why did this happen to me? So I studied psychology, went to school for degrees, and found all this knowledge. But as far as the wisdom and the education, I still didn't really have. I found that out later on because of the access I have to individuals like you or this. And it's like, man, we have, we obviously know we have this gap. And um, so what, now we're in 2025. You have a lot happening. Like every day, I feel like I don't watch the news per se, but I get my news source. I get my news through different channels, like a lot of people through the internet, even Telegram. It's crazy how we get the news today. And, you get a message about something and it's like, whoa, it's impactful. It's
Hmm.
impactful, these decisions that our leaders are making. These things are actually impacting people's mental health, their financial health, like these different things. So as far as, what do you see or what is coming down the pipe that you know about that is some type of reform for law enforcement getting some help in the sense of mental health addiction? Is there anything coming? I mean, I mentioned PARI. Is there anything else that you know about that is part of this administration or just something coming that I don't know about or the audience that we can kind of look forward to? Or is it just you, Jeff, going out there and saving the world? 'Cause,
No, no. Well, I mean, there's a lot of Jeffs. I know that,
yeah.
and um, doing the same thing that I'm trying to do, and some are a whole lot better at it than I am. Um, and I don't. There probably is something in the pipeline. I don't know about it, but I will say this, and I think the fact that RFK, who just got confirmed, I saw he is in recovery. He had a problem. That's a that's a good thing. I think, because he can speak to a lot of the um, issues in addiction a whole lot better than somebody who has never experienced it, right? I mean, it's like going to a therapist who has never suffered through addiction, and not that they're not useful, but I mean, I have found that therapists who are in recovery are a whole lot more useful to me than those that are not. And so I think with him being in the position that he's going to be in, I really hope that some of these initiatives will become a little bit stronger. But to your point, advertised more, I mean, and I think that comes down to a whole group of people coming up and raising their voice and saying, hey, this is a problem and we need help. And that's what you and me and some of the other guys I know that are doing the same thing. But I will say this, and I don't know how you were when you were in active addiction. I knew I needed help. I knew I needed something, but I didn't want to search for it. Or if I did search for it, I wasn't looking for like what I'm selling right now. Right. And so there has to be a way to be able to present that to people who are in active addiction that makes it appealing to them, or makes them drawn to it, right? I mean, I try to do social media posts all the time, and I hate social media and I'm not good at it, but I try to do these posts hoping somebody will grab that nugget. But is that really the best way to do it? I don't know. I hate having any government initiative. I should have started this with that, because the government doesn't do things well. I mean, we all know that typically. I mean, I worked for the government. I know they don't do things well. But if you have some type of private program, some initiative that the government is sanctioning or helping or funding, absolutely, it could probably have a positive impact.
Yeah. I mean, you look at drug courts, right? Which they're changing them to be called like recovery courts, and they have different names now because of the sensitivity around,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the words and how they impact people. So, drug courts are one of those initiatives that have been around for a while. And some states, they're newer, but that initiative, I would say overall, and if anyone disagrees, come on the show, but is a net positive. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
throwing someone in jail for 2 years because of drug addiction versus sending them into a drug court for 18 months with 5 day a week intensive drug rehabilitation, I think that's a little better. And, I've personally worked in a drug court and I've trained drug courts, and I think, and it's funny, I call them drug courts, but I know some people are like, hey, that's recovery courts. We
Yeah.
changed the name. So whatever, recovery drug courts. So that initiative definitely saves taxpayer dollars. Go and Google that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
taxpayer dollars, I don't know the numbers, but it's really big. Sending someone to a drug court versus prison is a big savings to tax dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's way better for the individual, in my opinion. So, um, yeah, I think, you know, how do you get to the table and have the conversation to make a big impact? And I think, RFK Jr., as much as people are very triggered by him, you got to look at someone's life experience and walking
Mm-hmm.
with integrity. When
Mm-hmm.
someone talks about addiction, if they've been through it or not. It's very clear, like, okay, this person's been through that. And he's been through heroin addiction, like serious heroin addiction, alcohol addiction. So regardless of someone's right or left beliefs, it's like we got to put that aside and we got to go, wow, we have an opportunity here to really bring in money. I'm talking billions of dollars
Mm-hmm.
into education, not just treatment centers, not just rehabs. I mean, actual educating programs, free advocacy to be able to help people, including law enforcement, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to allow people to ask for help. Because, like you said, I've had the same struggle for 7 years. I left my job, a career, a successful career at the top of my game to do this mission, Entrepreneurs
Mm-hmm.
Recovery, to just get wrecked financially. But I did it because this is my purpose and passion. And then I figured out the financial side in time, but it's still what do I put out there for content? Am I doing it for gain or am I doing it to give? And either way, it's okay. But at the same time, what do you say to people to help them have a life that you have and are
Mm-hmm.
creating? And
Mm-hmm.
that's really the mission, right? It's like I didn't write the book so that I could make millions of dollars. I wrote the book like you. It was a memoir that also had a step-by-step guide to finding abundance in
Mm-hmm.
the worst pain of your life, following those steps and habits. So, you know,
And I think when you and I spoke last time, we talked about this. I mean, what you and I are doing, and if you're familiar with step programs, right, we're doing step 12, right? Where you can't keep what you don't give away. And so like we said, we have stories. We want to tell people about it. Um, I'm not telling you what to do because everybody else has been telling you what to do your whole life. I'm suggesting, or I'm telling you my story, and let's see if you can relate. And as we know, anybody in addiction, their story is always the same. Like I hear my story and everybody's story, regardless if you've been locked up or you've been in law enforcement. The storyline is typically the same, and to me that's inspiring because I know that, hey, I'm not alone, and I can continue to try to work on this mission, and do this selfishly because I know it helps my sobriety, but I'm also helping others, right? And I don't care about my selling books. Like you said, I don't care about money. I left my career as well because of my addiction and my family, and it's the best decision I ever made because I'm happier now than ever. But also I feel compelled now to help other people. Like you get more people like Jesse and Jeff, and people that have walked the walk, like we talk about, like RFK and stuff. You get more people out there talking about it. And I'm not a big AA guy, and I'm sure people will scream about that, but AA can be stuffy, right? I think that there needs to be a little bit more um, contemporary model pushed on recovery. Hey, it's not sitting in a dank room at the bottom of a church in a meeting. That's depressing, right? No, we could talk about it on a podcast. We can go have coffee. We can go do this because sobriety is great. Let me show you the other side. It's not what everybody else thinks. When I first went out, I thought that, first off, I thought alcoholics were only homeless people underneath a bridge, right? I mean, obviously that's not true. And then when I started my recovery journey, I started to think, well, the only people that are going to be in my AA meetings are going to be World War II or World War uh, Vietnam veterans who are angry and, smoke too much. And that happened my first meeting, by the way. I went to that and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't relate to these people. But the more you're around it, you realize, oh my gosh, I can relate to you. I can. You have the same story as me, even though you smoke like a train and I don't. But people don't know that when they're searching for answers, right? There's stigmas around everything, and that's where it starts. Drop the stigmas, right?
yeah.
And I know I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah. I mean, so getting into the asking for help. So asking for help. So someone's listening to this podcast right now, they're in law enforcement and they're like, man, I'm in it. I'm in it. I'm deep into the throes of addiction. I'm deep into the throes of whatever addiction. Now, we're not just talking about alcohol and drugs. It could be sex addiction, gambling addiction. And, they're listening and they're like, wow, I'm not going to AA or Gamblers Anonymous or any of these things. I've already done that. I'm not doing that. And, it's like, where do they go? And this is kind of like the start of my journey too, is like, where do people go if they're not going to the 12 steps?
Mm-hmm.
If they're not going to church either, if they're not going to a religious, like, you know what I mean? Like, where do you go? And where do a lot of people go? Suicide,
Mm-hmm.
overdose.
Mm-hmm.
So we're, and those stats are staggering. So what is the other plan C, plan B, the next option? And that's really where the education that was provided on a free podcast, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I was in abstinence sobriety 15 years. And then I decided to research psychedelic assisted therapy. And after 4 years of research, I decided that to do it, And then that changed my whole life. That changed the way people look at me. Many people went away. Many people from the AA community left. Some people stayed, and that's okay. I did it because even on this show, we're over 50 episodes in, I get to interview people because of not being so rigid as I was. I get to interview people who run fellowships like Psychedelics in Recovery. I
Yeah.
never would have had that person in my life.
Yeah.
So that's my point, is like, as I chip away at my rigidity, as I chip away at my beliefs and all this like stuckness and what I believe addiction recovery should look like, I get to expand into conversations of all types, whether it is a 12-step approach, a psychedelics and recovery approach, or many other approaches that people have never heard of. Because let's be real too, everyone has different stories of trauma and their own stories of being raised in certain households or young adult trauma. And also, everyone is different in the way they respond to their
Yeah.
recovery. And
Absolutely.
that's the key. People believe
Absolutely.
that everyone gets sober in when they're an alcoholic in AA. It's like, are you
No.
kidding me? Not
No.
over 90% of people. This is a stat I read. Someone can fact check it if they want. 90% of people who are struggling with alcohol addiction find their own recovery path.
Yeah.
They find a way on their own. So
Hmm.
that's a staggering report number, but I didn't know that when I was in the thing I was in. And when
Hmm.
I left that thing, I started to understand, wow, there's a lot of people out there who do it on their own. They
Hmm.
find podcasts like this, they do cold plunge sauna practices, they do all these things to really help themselves. So I'm going on a little rant here just to say, being open about this too, and
Hmm.
being allowing people to have their experience, where people sometimes need to go through the addiction. They need to go through that. It sounds crazy, but once they get through that and they hit a point of an arrest, an overdose, they survive, or even just, they spent all their money on their addiction. It's it's like it can become a huge blessing in disguise to
Hmm.
start to look and peel back the layers of pain, just like you had.
Hmm.
And what did you find when you started to peel back those layers when you got sober? Like, what did you find? What did you discover that was sort of the root?
Well, and first, I 100% agree with you on all that open mindedness, right? And everybody everybody's recovery is different. It looks different. I'm not a big AA guy. I don't go to AA, but I practice the principles because it works for me, just like my faith does, right? Um, and I am so intrigued by the whole psychedelic talk, right? I want to learn more. RFK even said he's interested in learning more about it. But that goes back to your point. Yes, you need to sit in some pain for a little bit. You need to listen to your body, right? Pain is just a message that your body's sending you. It's not something that you take Tylenol for, right? You got to look back and see what the heck is causing it. And once you do that, then you can start this is the baseline. This is where you can start entertaining what's going to work for me. It's going to suck. It's not easy. There's no magic pill, which a lot of people we live in a society of immediate gratification and immediate, response, and in addiction that just doesn't happen. I mean, unless they figure out some kind of brain surgery where they just rewire your brain. But then are you a changed person still? Right. And I told my wife this the other day because we were talking about psychedelics. I said, you got to go through a little bit of some sort of program, whatever it is, and a little bit of suffering so that at the very end, whenever you do find recovery, and let's say you use some means to do it, some medication or whatnot, but you still got to go through that stuff because if you don't, we're going to have a whole bunch of sober assholes walking around. You know, we're not going to have good people because it's a life change, right? It should affect everything in your life, not just your habits. Um, and so I think when I was going through it and when I started peeling back, what one thing I learned, because I'm an investigator, right? I did it for 22 years. I wanted to, I'm a problem solver. I want to find resolution. I want to find the beginning, the middle, the end done. So I tried to treat my not only my addiction that way, but my traumas. And I got frustrated doing that because I would never find the sources, or I wouldn't find the answers I needed. And when I would get frustrated, I would just drink more. It would be my, it would fuel that. And then I finally reached a point where I'm like, I don't need to know everything. I don't need to know the sources. I've identified something has happened, but as far as the specifics of it, that doesn't matter anymore. And this is where the whole thing, live in the moment, be present, right? I need to get back to this present moment instead of digging into this cold case of my life, um, and start moving forward and figuring out what plan I need to survive right now. Um, because as much as I would like to know everything in my past, I don't think it's useful. I really don't. And I think a lot of people need to realize that if you have some sort of trauma, yes, you probably need to walk through it with somebody you trust or a therapist, and try to get some type of conclusion on it. But let's put a cap on it when you're done, because your behavior now needs to be worked on, not your pain.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you agree with me on that, but I think that's why it's important to be reflective, but don't live in it.
Yeah, it makes me think. I'm thinking of a lot of things that I've heard over the years, and I, yeah, I think. Oh man, there's this one saying I used to hear this guy say in meetings, and he's like, I'm gonna mess it up, but he's like, you're in here in the meeting, and your disease is outside doing push-ups in the parking lot and
Mm,
pull-ups, and it's
mm,
like it's just really funny. So I think about like the flip side of being addicted to healing, and that's what happens. I've been in that too,
mhm,
where you're
mhm,
you're so deep into your recovery, you're addicted to the healing part of it, which is like what you said, like the purpose. This is my opinion. The purpose of life is the present moment. It is
mhm,
the all reality happening, the present. And when you're in an addiction or depression or anxiety, you're not in the present.
mhm,
Period. You're in the past. You're in the present.
mhm,
Sometimes the drug you're using actually puts you into the present and teaches you lessons in the present, which can be useful. That's why I don't bash drug addiction or alcoholism, because there can be lessons in the experience of intoxication before and after about the present moment, because that's what you're really seeking, right? Gabor Mate, again, bringing him up. Like he says that people who use heroin, it's a warm hug, the hug they didn't get from their mom
mm,
and dad growing up.
mhm,
It's a warm hug. I have shot heroin. That is true. I have felt that. And I felt that with psychedelics in a very psychedelic integrated way. So it's really interesting what we're chasing. We're ultimately chasing the current present moment, in the
mhm,
moment, feeling okay, feeling safe, feeling heard, feeling seen. And we do everything we can to get that feeling. And I think that the coping mechanisms for each person is different depending on what your childhood was like, what your tools were like, all of these things, the environment you live in, because even where you live can make a difference in your recovery process. So,
mhm,
yeah, I do agree. I think that we can get so deep into the healing process, we're losing the fact of the beauty of the trees and the forest and the river and all these things around us, because we're like, okay, now I'm doing internal family systems, and now this part of me's talking to this part, and now this is and it's like, yes, it's important to understand these different inner world parts of you and all this stuff, but it's also important to effing live. And
yeah,
I'm speaking to myself as well, like sometimes you just gotta live and you just
mhm,
gotta experience life again. And what I found, and that's why I did the push-ups in the parking lot, is what I found is this, where I am in my journey, is my, let's just call it trauma narrative, or the way that I was raised, that's sort of the through line trying to come through my life. It still appears in other things. It still
mm,
shows up in crisis management with other good things in my life, where, oh man, I have this peace now, and I'm more content. And then all of a sudden there's a part of my nervous system seeking the chaos still. It's still seeking
Oh,
my
absolutely.
childhood up and down.
Yeah.
And that's when you start to get to that level of awareness, that's when you can really realize, like, holy crap, it doesn't matter how much time I have in recovery.
Hmm.
There's still a part of me that wants to go to that chaos. It wants to
Hmm.
go back to
Hmm.
crisis management. That's why, like you said, live your life, like live in the
Yeah.
moment. There's going to be grief. There's going to be sadness. There's going to be elation. There's going to be joy. And I think like that's a really important lesson.
I think that there's always going to be identifying your past. It'll come to you. When you force it, it's not going to come to you, right? You get frustrated, and that's what happened with me. And the more that you are in the present, and I'm just like you, I am very much I thrive. I shouldn't say thrive. Well, yeah, I do thrive in chaos, but I was more comfortable in chaos and disruption than I was being just normal. And that's one of the reasons I drank. It brought me down to that peace. And as a matter of fact, I would be a little bit more in the moment than, because it would shut my mind off. It would shut the noise in my brain down a little bit. Um, Enough where I would start appreciating things I didn't realize I had, right? Oh, I really love my family. I have a house and this and that. And of course, not realizing I was on the verge of losing all of that. And so I think that the more that you try, the more recovery that you get underneath your belt, things start percolating a little bit more. And I start to remember things, or I start to see things differently, and sometimes that can make me want to act out again, and that's where they say, it's an ongoing process, right? You're not cured or healed from addiction. It is what it is. You have a chronic disease. You're going to have it for the rest of your life. um, Use the tools that you know to move forward, with it, and that's the coming to terms with that. Personally, I'm one of these guys. They say, um, people say, "I'll never drink again." I can't say that. It's I'm one of the ones that has to say, "I won't drink today," you know, or "I won't look at a whole bunch of porn today," or "I won't, you know, I won't eat that whole cake today." Right? I probably will, but I mean, we choose our battles. And so that's living in the moment instead of the future.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I've yeah, there's a lot of wisdom that is shared between people who have experiences in recovery for long periods of time, and it doesn't make it better or worse. But what you're saying to me is, we all have this healing experience, or this human experience, and we are all just, like I said, trying to find, love, contentment in these things. And we're really lucky, people who are addiction, or find addiction, because we went so into the addiction, we found all these ways to heal. So that's
Yeah.
really the great blessing in disguise, is there is no way I would have written a book, I would have done the things I did, if it wasn't for the destruction I caused and the things I did. So that's the great, and that's what's interesting. I know so many people who don't have like the standard I believe everyone is addicted in some way, but the standard big addictions that are like the brown paper bag under the bridge, like I know so many people who live like ordinary lives, and they're just living their life, somewhat happy, somewhat sad, somewhat this. I'm wicked blessed. Like, I blew my life up. I got arrested by a postal inspector like you at one point. And because of that, I was exposed to the criminal justice system. I was appointed a court appointed lawyer for 2 years. They paid for 3 years. I was exposed to 12-step programs. I was exposed to mentors and pastors and all these people I never would have been presented. So I look at it like a great blessing, my
Hmm.
addiction. so that I could meet people like you, have these interviews, interviewing someone in law enforcement for 22 years. It's like, I think, if I didn't have those, maybe I would misunderstand law enforcement. Maybe I would, and instead I look at it like, wow, like I respect law enforcement. I have this appreciation, and I know the gaps, and I know the big
Mm-hmm.
challenges too,
Mm-hmm.
because I've chosen to learn through drug courts and different entities, and my friends that are in law enforcement, they wouldn't have been my friends if I didn't blow up my life with addiction. So, I guess it's another rant to just say, like, there's anyone who's listening too, it's like, if you are in the cups of whatever you're in, on the other side of that could be the most incredibly abundant, life-changing
Mm-hmm.
life. And it doesn't mean your nervous system is going to be fully healed and you're going to feel love and peace all the time. No, that's not reality. If you look out in nature, is nature like no chaos and
Yeah.
perfectly, or no, there's so much chaos. And that's the beauty. In the chaos, then comes the calm, then
Yep.
comes the growth. And that's what we've experienced right now. There's this lifetime journey of learning and growing. And, I know many people in 2024, it was the hardest year of their life. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, wow, you think life is getting easier. I have more wisdom and I know more about healing
Yeah.
and I know about spirituality. It doesn't matter. Like, life is happening. And, um, you know, I find this really fascinating, our conversation going to this, because it reminds me of a lot of the discussions I have with people who are farther along the journey, even in age. They talk about addiction in life as the root of it is your disconnection from source, your disconnection from the allness, from God, whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
call that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 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 that's the root of the addiction before the trauma. And it sounds esoteric, but like, I think there's a lot of truth to that
And
disconnection.
that's the purpose, right, of addiction. Well, that's the purpose of using substance
Yeah.
to get in the way of things, to remove you. And one of the things you said made me think. You, have you ever noticed that people that live in third world countries, right, that don't have anything, that are poor, 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 have more faith than people who are rich? It happens. Trust me. I mean, and I think it's because when you have abundance and you don't realize it, you're distracted. And I'm not saying you need to be poor in order to be a great person. What I'm saying is that people don't slow down enough to realize what they have, or their health, or today, or their family, right? And so I think that when you get distracted, you're not looking at what is wrong inside. You're looking at, what can I fix to get it fixed right now, not realizing that the destination is the journey, right? That's my peace, my um, appreciation for life is life every day. It's not that job that I'm going to get. It's not getting money. It's not getting this. No, it's me navigating this moment, um, without regret, instead of always trying to seek some type of 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 abundance. I'm starting to go deep too. But that, when I heard that about people like that are really poor having more faith, that's because they have nothing else, and so they're not distracted, and they can focus on the present, right? You know,
Yeah.
What God will provide for me for right now. And so I think that's beautiful, right? I mean, we have a lot to learn from people like that, and especially in the society that we live in now, especially in the United States. We're so distracted, we're so overwhelmed, we're overinformed, um, there's too many lights and whistles, and if you're already struggling with addiction, or struggling with trauma, you already have OCD, ADD issues, and it's just coming at you at 100, miles a minute, and it's a perfect storm, you know.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. Overinformed. We have at the tips of our fingers a smartphone that
Hmm.
can literally tell you what to do in every moment now, with Chat GPT and Gemini and all these AI platforms. Like, now you could just talk to the chat GPT and, disconnect even more. So we're in such an interesting moment in history and whole moment in time. And you're right. I live in Central America and I get to experience many local people who are like, their smile says it all. Like when I see their smile, I'm like, damn, like I don't even have that most days. Like
Yeah.
that's something very, very, I would say sacred. Honestly, when I see
Hmm.
that, I'm like, man. And I think, back in the States, where I was there for 41 years, like that was something that I would see once in a while. But I think there's so much happening that even going to the grocery store or going somewhere, it was like it would be a jolt to my nervous system because I know people are struggling and heavily medicated and just trying to
Hmm.
get by. And it's like a lot of the people I see here, like, yeah, similar, but they're also like going to the sunsets every day
Hmm.
and watching
Hmm.
the sunset. That is like the ultimate dopamine
Absolutely.
grounding, barefoot in the sand in the ocean. It's like these are the little things that have been lost. And these are the things that maybe we could start to get back, including, you know, money coming into actual programs and things, but we already have a perfect program here. The
Yeah.
Earth, universe, like we have things that are really profound, and we get lost in that because we're overeducated, overstimulated. And by the way, like anyone listen knows that that's been me 1,000 times in
Hmm.
my recovery journey. Never mind without it. Like I get lost in this stuff too. That's why we have discussions like I'm having with Jeff, and so that I can be like, oh yeah, why am I doing this? Okay, yeah, that's right. It's you know what's the ultimate purpose here? So I mean, this has just been a really fascinating discussion. I think that um, yeah, I would love to let I want you to let the audience know, if you would, what is your vision right now that you're bringing to life? What are you manifesting and creating right now?
I think my vision, I mean, I'm a part of a couple nonprofits where I'm trying to reach people, first responders, um, and let them know that they're not alone and to try to remove the stigmas by telling my story, and hoping that more people will start standing up and helping me, but also those that are struggling, getting the courage to come out and realize that, hey, this is the direction we're all walking. Let's do it together. Um, it's hard because again, I don't have any formal training in this. Like, I don't know how to motivate and encourage people. All I can do is tell you my story. And I've gotten good responses because I think a lot of people, whenever you're really uh, raw, with your past, your story, your hey, no holds barred, um, people seem to respect that more. And I find some people actually will be more willing to share their story and they've never been heard. And that's what people want. We're creatures of community, and that's what we need. I mean, you said it earlier, talking to Gemini and Chat GPT, talk about the isolation issues that are going to continue to get worse, right? We need community. We need nature. And I want to talk about these things like with you right now, whether or not it's in a book or it's on a podcast or on one of my social media posts. Hey, let's try this. Let's do this. Let's do that. Um, and so that's kind of my vision to continue to do until I reach the right person who's willing to help amplify that, even more, a group of people, whatever it is, so that we can start working towards a solution instead of dealing. It's going to get worse. That's my fear. And I want to make a better world for my daughters and for all kids, right? I mean, I want to be a good example of a husband and a father, and I think other men need to hear that because they need to step as we're a society of adolescent adults. We really are. And addiction is selfishness 100%. And so I think that that's where um, we need to start focusing on finding better solutions to this instead of just, oh, it is what it is, you know.
Yeah. So, like, where could people work with you? Do you coach people? Like, I went to your website. I didn't even see, which is very rare. Like, I don't see coaching on there. And like, usually there's something. So, what is it? Yeah. Well, how can people work with you, reach you? What are you up to?
Um, I I don't really coach people. I mean, it doesn't mean that I won't. I'll help anybody that's struggling. It doesn't matter um, what the situation is. If you go to my website, there is contact information in there. As far as you can email me soberfromsin at icloud.com. Um, all my social media handles are sober from sin, so you can find me there. To include LinkedIn, right? And just reach out to me, and we can touch base and try to navigate what you need or what resources you may need. I can try to find it for you if you need somebody to talk to. I love hearing those stories, right? It's one big AA meeting. I shouldn't
Yeah.
say that because people, oh, I don't
Yeah.
want to be part of AA, but I'm
People are
just,
very sensitive. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh, well, yeah, that's amazing. I feel like we'll stay connected, and if you ever get connected with PARI or some other type of organization, man, you should be a keynote speaker. That's what I'm advocating for that.
Oh,
And
thanks. I appreciate it.
yeah, and then maybe we can collaborate at some stage too, because I've done a lot of facilitation in like those different spaces, but it would be cool to to speak to those organizations and just combine the both sides of it, both
Yeah,
sides. And I think you being a former postal inspector is just the comedy. I love the cosmic humor in life,
that is crazy.
and that is very fun and funny, and made my day. I didn't know that till this morning. I was like, oh, perfect. And but yeah, let's keep in touch. Thank you for this, and yeah, let's just keep doing the work you're doing, man. Your openness, your authenticity. I mean, it is a truly uh, a gem and a pleasure. And I'm really excited to watch what you do and what happens over the next course of 2025 and beyond to see because what you're doing is incredibly needed. I mean, I am in
Yeah,
touch with, like you said, law enforcement through my trainings, and so I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens next, my friend.
absolutely. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Jesse.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for coming on. And this was a great experience, my friend. And yeah, many blessings. Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs in Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.